Would you explain to the group what the rebel capitalist is and your background in all this? Because you're one of the all-time guys I always go to learn about what's really going on in the macro world of the economy.
I retired in 2012. That's when I got into economics because I needed to manage my own portfolio. I didn't want to delegate that to a financial planner. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what the Fed was. I didn't know what the bond market was. I barely knew what interest rates were. The more I studied, the more I realized that the mainstream view and the mainstream economics wasn't really based in common sense. So I preferred a more common sense approach. I just became fascinated with it and almost obsessed with economics and macroeconomics and how the economy works and, how the yield curve and the dollar and all these things play together. And so I continued to study it till 2019, and that's when I started my YouTube channel. And fortunately, it did pretty well. That was the George Gammon channel where I was doing whiteboard videos on macroeconomic topics. And then in 2020, interesting timing there, I started the Rebel Capitalist Show, and that's where I first met you. And you were nice enough to come on the show, and I talked to you and Kim, and that was really a special moment for me, that's for sure. And then in 2021, I started the Rebel Capitalist channel. That was really to push back against all of the nonsense I thought we were seeing with cerveza sickness. And when I say nonsense, I mean the government intrusion in our lives. And I thought that regardless of where you came down or what your opinion was on what the policies should be, that the policies that were being enacted were putting us on a very slippery slope towards authoritarianism and potentially totalitarianism. And at the very least, the economic policies that were being pursued during that time would lead to substantial consumer price inflation, and on net balance would be a negative for the average Joe and Jane, which is pretty much what we've seen play out. Fortunately, the channel has done well. It's grown very quickly. YouTube did take down my channel, the Rebel Capitalist channel, momentarily in 2021 for pushing back against those government policies. But Joe Rogan was nice enough to get involved, and as soon as he did, YouTube put the channel back on. That kind of brings us to where we are today. It's really all about freedom, liberty, and free market capitalism, and then just trying to help people navigate this insane world of out of control central banks and big governments.
This really is out of control. A question I had for you, given your background and all this, you have Trump stepping in there. Could you imagine if Kamala had won?
Regardless of where you stand on tariffs as far as an economic policy or negotiating tool, I think if you have those values that I was talking about, the personal, individual liberty, the freedom component, the free market capitalism, if you think the best path towards prosperity, and by the way, if you're in favor of free speech, which is another huge issue. That was my number one topic in the election. Right. You have to be very, very thankful that Donald Trump was elected. Now, we'll see how this plays out, but regardless of how it plays out from the standpoint of a recession or the U.S. economy over the next 3 or 4 years, I can assure you it's going to play out a lot better for individual freedom and liberty than it would have under Kamala Harris. And another thing that was big for me in the election was war. It's very bizarre to me. The people on the left are now favorable towards war. I always thought that was a bad idea. For Trump to come in and talk about reducing the amount of war that we have in the world, I thought that was a good thing. For sure. It seems like so far it's playing out well on that front. And it's definitely been playing out well on the censorship front, where even if Trump hasn't enacted specific policies, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't, he has created this shift within the narrative, especially with the tech companies, where you've got guys like Zuckerberg and now Bezos with the Washington Post, Amazon. They're all coming out and saying, oh, well, all of this censorship that we were doing in the past, we're going to abandon that, and we're going to move more towards kind of an open dialogue, let's say, and we're not going to shadow ban these dissenting views, which it implicitly admitted to during the last 4 years. So, whether that's genuine or not, I think on net balance, it doesn't really matter, because regardless of what their intentions are, result is going to be that we have a more open dialogue back and forth. And I think that's a good thing, because so many people that were labeled conspiracy theorists to where their views didn't matter, those were the people that turned out to be right, not just about the government policies, but also about the economic policies that were enacted over the last 4 years.
When you look at the Department of Government Efficiency, and what I compare the George to is the national debt, which is around 36 trillion. And then the long-term off-balance sheet debt is almost 200 trillion. The biggest problem I see is the thing that brought down the 2008, the GFC, Great Financial Crisis, was derivatives. Derivatives is a quadrillion problem. So you have trillion, you have billion, trillion, quadrillion. When you start getting into quadrillion is a trillion or something like that. I mean, it gets absurd.
Yeah.
It's so absurd. And so a lot of times I'm speaking about how do you protect yourself from this insanity running the world right now. And even Jim Rickards says, who's going to bail out the Fed? He's asking that question. And that's why I listen to guys like you and Rickards and a whole bunch of other guys who have a macro view on this whole thing. But you have an end the Fed thing too going, don't you?
Yeah. I don't like central planning, Robert. I don't like central planning in people's lives. I don't like central planning of the economy. And I don't like central planning in terms of the interest rates. That's the price of money. And money is one half of every single transaction. So if anything should be in the free market, I think it should be the price of money. In other words, interest rates. And that's one of the main reasons why I want to get rid of the Fed.
You may not understand, central planning is Marxist, is that they control everything from the center. I was just listening to this guy, Victor Davis Hanson, who is clear-headed, but he's a Stanford guy. And he was doing a whole dissertation or a whole podcast on the left. It's really hard for me to understand. These are highly educated, like Stanford professors and all this. How can they be so off the mark? And Victor Davis Hanson was doing his best to explain that. And then you have Trump derangement syndrome. Those are the guys who went nuts because Trump was going to win. Then there's another guy, Dalio or Schiff, one of those guys, who's saying that we're in a civil war right now. Talk about an oxymoron, civil war. But this country is so divided right now. I just wanted to get your point of view on the whole thing.
I think on paper, yes. In theory, yes. In practice, I hope so. But I don't know. I mean, we're seeing a lot of what Elon Musk is trying to do, and Trump and the whole administration, in increasing the efficiencies of government. They're getting just an incredible amount of pushback. They'll continue. I don't know, regardless of their intentions or their policies, how much they'll be able to move the needle. But I do think it's a good thing. Just because we're talking about it, and the fact that it's even a possibility, I think is a great thing. Just the fact that Doge or Musk was able to go in there with USAID or USAID and kind of pull back the curtain and show the general public what has been going on with their tax dollars for so many years. Even if you're on the right, left, it really doesn't matter. You can't be in favor of what the USAID group was actually doing. Now, you can pick out little pieces. You might be able to argue that they're positive. But if you look at the totality of what they were doing, I mean, it was completely insane. It would have been considered conspiracy theory, but now it's obviously conspiracy fact, and it makes American people open up their eyes, and it makes them ask questions that we should have been asking for the last, 4 or 5 decades. I think that's a very positive thing. I think that maybe starts a momentum where people are waking up to how badly they've been screwed and how really malicious our government was, not only towards other countries, but towards the people themselves.
They call it a money laundering scheme. I don't want to be biased, but it seems most are Democrats. Is that your point of view? That most are Democrats.
From what I've seen, that seems to be the evidence, but we'll have to see how this plays out. I think there's plenty of nefarious activity on both sides. You've got to think about what it takes to be a good politician. And to be a good politician, you have to be a good liar. You've got to forego principles. Now, the best politician of all time, in my view, is Ron Paul. That's because he's a man of principles and he told the truth. Unfortunately, he never made it to that top levels. I'm not a big fan of politicians as a whole. I would agree that it seems like the ones that are doing most of the back end dealing. I hate to throw them all under the bus.
Nancy Pelosi got $14 million to finance her vineyard. And then Stacey Abrams got, I think, $2 billion, and her little company only had $100 collected, but she got $2 billion. It's money laundering, if you know what I mean. That's the problem right now.
It's all power dealing, money laundering, stealing from the taxpayer. I mean, that's what's been going on. It's repulsive. It's disgusting. But that's politics in the United States. And I would argue that's pretty much politics in every single country. The people that think federal government or the central planners, the authoritarians, what I call them, have their best interest as their number one priority are just lying to themselves. I mean, they're looking at the mirror and they're either lying to themselves or choosing to bury their head in the sand like an ostrich. Again, what Doge is doing that's very positive is it's shining a light on all of this crazy behavior and what should be unacceptable for the American people. But in order for it to be unacceptable, in order for the American people to get pissed off enough to actually enact change, they need to be aware of it to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think that now they're more and more aware of it. And hopefully we'll see this continue throughout the rest of Trump's campaign.
This is Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. Our guest today is George Gammon. We talk about the problem. When we come back, I'm going to ask George about solutions. What can individuals do? I don't think we'll ever end corruption, though, as long as there's always corruption everywhere.
That's right.
The problem is when you can't trust your money. I talk about George's the bifurcation, and bifurcation is an interesting word. So every time you print money, yield curve goes up and it bifurcates, which means it splits. So one goes down and the curve keeps climbing. So in a society where we print money, what happens is when the curve splits, it bifurcates. The poor and the middle class get poorer because they can't handle inflation. But the rich get richer and they keep climbing up because they have real assets.
Right.
And so when you print money, there's an inflation of assets, but there's also inflation in chicken, eggs, and milk. And that wipes out the middle class. And I look at the homelessness right now going, what the hell's going on in this country? Yeah. So we come back, George, we'll be going into what a person can do for solutions, because we all know there's a problem. And I think Trump is really shining light on the swamp. But the question is it enough? We do have time, but what can each of us do? So we'll be right back. Interesting on the bifurcate. Huh?
I think you hit the nail on the head. When you get inflation that's moving everything up, the only thing we would perceive as good inflation would be assets. So everything else is bad inflation. To your point, the only people that maintain their purchasing power are the people that own those assets. And then you get that leads to social unrest.